What happens if you nick someone else's game, add a bit of your own and make it two-player? Welcome to this edition of my 8-bit battle series, where we look at the biggest UK selling 8-bit home computers and find out which one of the big three had the best games overall. Was it the ZX Spectrum? This was my original 48K plus one back in the day. Or was it the, oh, here we go, the AMSTRAD CPC? This is my newly acquired 464. Or maybe it was the Beige Wonder, although mine's not very beige because I've got the C64C, the Commodore 64. This is my favourite looking one though. Beautiful. Just hurt my nose. Today's game is an interesting one, and one that I played quite a lot back in the day on my ZX Spectrum. So before we look at the three versions up for scrutiny, let's dive into some things that you might not know about the game. Released by SNK, those chaps of Neo Geo fame, in 1986, its origins stem primarily from two other games, one of their own and one from Capcom. A year earlier, Capcom had huge success with its vertical run and gun game Commando in the arcades, and subsequently with the home ports to pretty much everything that was capable or not, as the case may be. At a similar time, SNK released a tank game called TANK or TNK3, depending on where you lived. This vertical tank shooter was fairly unique due to its unusual rotary joystick controller. This controller had a standard 8-way directional movement for the tank, but also featured a sort of dial fixed to the joystick which enabled 360-degree shooting of the tank's gun turret. So SNK took both of these games to create a brand new game, amalgamating both the tank's rotary joysticks and Commando's vertical run and gun success. Although you could argue that Taito's game Frontline had pretty much done the same thing some 4 years prior. Anyhow, with all this together and adding two players into the mix, they were hopeful of getting the license for the hit movie at the time, Rambo First Blood Part 2. But they were unsuccessful at acquiring the license, so they went with the Ikari part of the Japanese title of the movie. I'm going to get this wrong. Rambo Ikari no Dashutsu, which basically translates to Rambo the Furious Escape, as the simple title to the now unrelated Rambo game they had. Warriors was added to the Western version, and there the name was born. The initial arcade game instructions are fairly basic, with our two unnamed protagonists' objective simply being making it to the village of Ikari after crash landing their vehicle in enemy territory. The premise of the game was further embellished to provide names of the two characters, Colonel Ralph Jones in red and Second Lieutenant Clark Steele in blue, who were also known as Paul and Vince in some other regions apparently. Upon reaching the village, the pair actually rescue a rather large kidnapped military commander, who in Japan was named General Kawasaki, the surname of SNK's founder, and Colonel Cook, after TradeWest's founder Leland Cook, who published the game in North America. Looking at the size of the kidnapped military commander though, I'm pretty sure he could have escaped by himself. Interestingly, the enemy in the game appeared to be some sort of neo-Nazis, depending on what revision you are playing. Watching this footage of someone playing the Japanese version, swastikas are clearly visible on the floor of the final rooms, so obviously the game was banned in Germany. Our protagonists went on to star elsewhere also as playable characters in the Metal Slug 6 and 7 games and the King of Fighters series. So with all that put together, it made for a unique take on the vertical run and gunner using the same joysticks in TNK3 for shooting in all directions when on foot, and also for the tank portions of the game. The game went on to become a worldwide hit in 1986, making top 3 in multiple regions top grossing arcade games of the year. So naturally, home ports to everything, and I mean everything, followed. Some of the versions that stand out include this MSX version, purely for the bonkers idea of leaving the dead bodies splattered around the playing area. Oh, and also the really crap tank and pickups. The Atari versions, first up the 7800, which is actually pretty decent, but not quite as impressive as the attempt to bring the game to the VCS. Pretty impressive and also questionable as to why bother. The NES version, as far as I know, is the only version of the game where you actually get to fly a helicopter in the game, which is pretty cool. And interestingly, Quicksilver got the nod for the American Commodore 64 version of the game, which is considered terrible by everyone that's played it, and I can certainly vouch for its shitness. Elite finally published their own considerably better port in 1988 for the European market, which is the one that we will look at today, and is the first one in our three-way challenge. It's a good start for the Beige Beauty, with a nice score and the plane crash sequence that the arcade machine had. The graphics are, okay, a little clunky, with the green soldiers blending into their background a little too well at times, but on the whole, it's not too bad. It moves at a considerable rate, which is akin to the arcade version, but it does make the game a little tougher to play. The pickups are colour coded rather than graphically represented, which makes it hard to understand what it is that you've picked up. Again, like the arcade, the mines appear very quickly in front of you, which can be a frustrating way to die. I certainly found it more of a challenge than the other two to progress as far. You do get tanks earlier in the game, but they don't seem to last as long, which is a shame as they are often the most enjoyable part. The helicopters are present, although quite small and tricky to get around. Any minor gripes aside though, and this is leagues apart from the North American version, and I can see Elite's justification for releasing it, even though it was a full 2 years after the original game had come out. I imagine this was fun with 2 players, and like the other versions here, you can play in a locked front mode, which is what you saw in the main footage without the rotary joysticks. So it's a nice touch to give that option here, despite that the game is much better when shooting bi-directional. Zap magazine gave the game 89%, criticising its slightly weak sound and sometimes clunky graphics, but enjoying the game nonetheless. And it's difficult not to read the review and agree with it. It's solid, not setting the world on fire, quite difficult playing solo, but a proper treat despite all that. Rubber keyed Wonder now, although no rubber keys in this 128K version, just so we can listen to the soundtrack that would not have been present in the 48K version. A rather overpowering green intro screen that is a bit of a mess frankly, and after that the music is done. A plethora of options to choose from, including a Kempston mouse interface option, which is not something you see often in games. Straight in on the action, and I instantly noticed a rather noticeable lack of decent sound, even for the 128K version. The other big issue is the one colour backdrop, which is a little too detailed, making bullets seem invisible at times as they blend in with the stony ground. The character sprites are excellent though, as is the tank, which is a much more hardy affair than the Commodore version. You have more chances here to avoid mines, which is nice, and like the Commodore version, it moves at a terrific pace, giving you that arcade feel. Crash magazine bemoaned the 2-year wait the game had after being seemingly finished by the original author David Perry, only to be scrapped and rewritten here by David Shear. This meant Speccy owners like C64 ones had to wait somewhat, and although Crash liked the game, this clearly pissed them off. So they gave it a rather mean score of 76%, which I personally think should have been closer to Zap's C64 score. Finally, it's the turn of the Peter Crouch of 8-bit micros, the CPC, and the first thing that hits you here when loading the game up is the god-awful artwork depicting our two heroes. It looks like the artists let their kids have a go. It's quite remarkably bad. Music is as good as the others, and there are good options per the Spectrum version, for redefinable keys or joystick configuration, including a key to toggle the way you shoot, as I mentioned before in both the other versions up here. Into the action, minus the crash scene, and this certainly looks better than the other two versions. It's a more tactical play than the other two, as it's certainly slower, but that's not a negative against it at all. If anything, it makes it more playable as you maneuver around avoiding the patterns of the bullets. Grenades can be annoying as you move too slowly to get out of the way of them sometimes, but on the whole it is a better experience personally. The tanks are really solid and much better at avoiding the mines similar to the Spectrum version, and because it's better graphically, you get better at avoiding bullets and bombs as you progress through the game and surviving longer in the tank. AMSTRAD Action also enjoyed this, giving it 91%. They especially enjoyed the two-player action and the fact it's possible to blow up your teammate. You have to also remember that this was the only release out of these three micros at the time, which must have felt nice to the AMSTRAD mob. So what's your favourite out of these three? It's a tough one because they're all really excellent ports of the game. They're all done really well. You can obviously see why Elite re-released the game for the European market after seeing Quicksilver's attempt at the... God, that's so bad. Poor Americans. I feel any Americans watching this, I feel for you growing up and experiencing that. It's really bad. It's worth seeking out and playing if you haven't played it, just to see how bad it is. Anyway, I digress. We have to pick a winner. So, oh God, this pains me. In third place, you know what's coming. It's the Spectrum version. I know. And it's the version I played when I was younger, and it's really, really good. It's just, when you've played the other two, and often it doesn't matter the lack of colour on the Spectrum because, you know, it is the Spectrum and it is what it is. But here, it makes a big difference. Often with the little stones and the little detail on the ground, which looks great, you can't see where the bullets are. Or you can't see the fellas hiding in the trees. They all sort of blend in. So it'd be nice if they just did something about that. And maybe less detail on the ground would have made this more playable so you can see the bullets. But it is a very good game, and I think Crash's score is a bit low. I think it should have been probably in the mid-80s like the Zap one. But against the other two, it's third place for me. Which means I'm going to go for the winner, and then I'll explain why. The winner of this 8-bit battle is... the CPC. Yep, the AMSTRAD wins again. It's got everything. It's not quite as quick as the other two. It's not quite as quick as the Spectrum and the Commodore, as I mentioned, but graphically it's spot on. And actually the speed of the game works really well. You can really sort of figure out where you are and maneuver around. I mean, the arcade one is quick, right? Because they want you to put your money in and they want you to die so you put more money in and you play again. But being that little bit slower and that little bit more tactical, I think makes the game better, honestly. And the tanks in this are brilliant. The tanks in this and the Spectrum are definitely better than the tanks in the Commodore. The tanks in the Commodore, because the mines just appear so quickly, you're going along and all of a sudden you get that little puff of smoke and you're in all sorts of trouble. Whereas with this and the Spectrum version, you get to be in the tanks a little bit longer. And I think we all agree that the tank part of the game is probably the most fun. Just steaming through, like when you go across the bridge and you're just running everyone over. That's definitely really good fun. So yeah, the Commodore version is good. Again, it's a solid version, but I think graphically it's not as good as the CPC. The CPC's colour palette is better suited to this, and it's a fantastic port of the game. So that's why I chose this one. If you disagree with me, please let me know in the comments and tell me I'm a twat. And similarly, if you think I'm spot on, then also let me know so I can feel better about myself. Well, that's it. That's that one. Let me know your thoughts and memories of this one in the comments. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. I don't know why I did that. Bye. Or that. Bye.